I want to start with a photograph because a photograph is where this whole terrible thing really begins, weeks before a single shot was fired. A couple of weeks before Christmas in 1929, a tobacco farmer here in our county loaded up his whole family, his wife and all 7 of his children, and drove them into town into Winston-Salem, and did 2 things that a poor dirt farmer in those days simply did not do. He bought every one of them brand new clothes, and then he took them to a photographer's studio and had a formal family portrait made. All 9 of them posed, and still in their fine new outfits looking into the camera. For a family like that in the time, that was an extravagance close to unthinkable. New clothes for 9 and a studio portrait on top of it 2 months into the Great Depression when nobody had 2 nickels to rub together. People who knew them couldn't make sense of it. And there was no sense to be made of it, not then. The sense only came later, and when it came, it was the worst kind of sense there is. Because on Christmas Day, a couple of weeks after that picture was taken, that same man killed his wife and 6 of his 7 children, and then walked off into the woods and killed himself. And they buried the family in the very clothes they'd worn for the photograph. He had their picture made first. He dressed them up and sat them down and had them preserved, and then he destroyed them. To this day, near 100 years on, nobody knows why he did either thing. The photograph survives. You can look at it. 9 faces looking back at you, and one of them already knew. Ready. But I'll tell you, that's not even the part of this story that has sat on our county like a stone all these years. The killing was a horror, and horrors happen. The part that's never quite let us go is what we did afterward. Because within days of that Christmas, this community took the worst thing that had ever happened to it and turned it into something you could pay a dime to walk through. And I know exactly how that felt. The dime in your hand and the door in front of you. Because when I was a boy, my own people took me to see it. So let me tell you the whole of it, the way it's been handed down to me and the way I saw the tail end of it with my own eyes. This is Stokes County up in the Piedmont of North Carolina, rolling red clay country, tobacco country. Germantown Brook Cove. Little farming communities strung through the hills. In 1929, it was a hard place to be poor, and nearly everybody was. You raised tobacco and you raised children, and you went to church, and you got by, or you didn't. The crash had come that fall, that October, and though it took a while for the full weight of the depression to settle down onto the back roads, you could already feel the cold of it coming. Folks were scared about money in a bone-deep way. And the Lawsons were one of those farming families, no different from 100 others. Charlie Lawson was the father Charles, but everyone called him Charlie, 43 years old, a tobacco farmer with his own place. And here is the thing that you have to understand, the thing that makes this so much harder to hold than if he'd been some known brute. By every account anybody ever gave, Charlie Lawson was a good man, a respected man. He worked hard. He provided. He wasn't a drinker. He wasn't known to be cruel to his wife or his children. He went to church. He was in the eyes of his neighbors exactly the kind of steady, decent family man you'd hold up as an example. There was no warning in him. That's the part that's haunted this county more than the blood. Not that a monster did a monstrous thing, we could almost understand that. But that a good and ordinary man, a man like your own neighbor, like your own self, did this. And gave no reason. And maybe had no reason that a sane mind could hold. His wife was Fanny, 37. And there were the 7 children. The oldest was Arthur, 16, a boy already half a man, doing a man's work on the farm. Then Marie, 17, no, I have that backwards. Marie was the oldest girl at 17, and Arthur, 16, the two big ones. Then Carrie, 12. Maybell, some spelled it, who was 7. The little boys James, 4, and Raymond, 2. And the baby Mary Lou, just a few months old, still in arms. 9 of them in that photograph. Charlie and Fanny and 7 children from a baby up to near grown. Hold them in your mind, because in a moment they become a number. The murdered Lawson family, and they were not a number. They were a farm family at Christmas, dressed in new clothes their father had bought them, not knowing it was the last thing he'd ever give them but their graves. Christmas morning, 1929. It would have started like Christmas anywhere poor and happy. The new clothes. The little ones up early. The oldest girl, Marie, baking a cake for the Christmas table the way the women and girls did. An ordinary, bright, cold Christmas morning in the hills. And early on, Charlie sent Arthur away. The oldest boy had been out rabbit hunting the way a country boy would on a free morning, and he'd run out of shells, and he set off to walk into Germantown to buy more. Now, whether his father deliberately got him out of the house or whether the boy just happened to go, the tellings differ, but everyone agrees on the result. Arthur walked off down the road that Christmas morning to buy a box of shells. And that walk is the only reason. There's a single Lawson left alive to bury the rest. His father, for whatever was moving in him, spared the one who wasn't there, or simply hadn't gotten to him yet. We'll never know which, and that not knowing is its own small horror, like the 3 little boys behind the wall. In another story I could tell you, you can't even be certain whether what saved a child was mercy or just the clock. And then over the course of that Christmas day, while one son walked to town and back, Charlie Lawson moved through his own family. I'm not going to walk you through it. I've made that choice every time I've told one of these, and I make it most firmly here because of the ages of them, because of the baby, because no good is served by my standing here and painting for you what one man did to 6 of his own children in the rooms of his own house on Christmas Day. You can carry the fact of it without the picture of it. It is enough to say that by the end of that afternoon, Fanny was dead, and Marie, who'd baked the cake, was dead, and Carrie and little Maybell were dead, and the 2 small boys who tried to hide from their own father were dead, and the baby was dead. 6 children, and their mother. And the most chilling telling detail, the one that tells you this was not a blind rage, but something colder and more deliberate. And in its way, more terrible is what he did after. He laid them out. He arranged them. He crossed their arms over their chests, and he put pillows beneath their heads. And for the 2 girls he'd killed out by the tobacco barn, where there were no pillows, he placed stones beneath their heads instead. He posed his murdered family the way you'd lay a body out for a wake for a viewing with care, with a kind of awful tenderness. The same hands that did it then tended to it. I have turned that over my whole life, and I cannot get to the bottom of it. A man does not, in a fit of madness, pause to fold his dead children's arms and pillow their heads. There was something in him that loved them even as he destroyed them, or believed he was sending them somewhere, or I don't know. Nobody knows. That's the whole point. Nobody has ever known. And here is a detail that says everything about how unthinkable this was, how far outside anything anyone could imagine. The neighbors heard the shots. Of course they did, out in that quiet country. And they thought nothing of it. Because it was Christmas, and on a country Christmas, a man's out with his gun, and the sound of gunfire on Christmas Day meant somebody was rabbit hunting. They heard a family being killed, and they heard the holiday. That's how impossible it was. The mind simply could not put the sound to the deed. When it was done, Charlie walked off into the woods behind the house, and he did not do it quickly. They could read it later in his footprints, that he walked and circled and paced for hours, back and forth among the trees with his 2 little beagle dogs, trailing along beside him the way dogs do. Hours out there in the cold, a man walking circles around the thing he was about to do. And then finally he did it. And the dogs were found lying beside him. And Arthur came home. The boy came back from town with his box of shells, and that is what he walked into. I won't say more about that either. There are some doors you just leave shut. They buried them 3 days later, the 28th of December. And the whole country came. They put the family in a single great grave together, and thousands of people turned out, thousands from all over the county and beyond. More people than those hills had ever held at once come to stand in the cold and witness a thing they could not comprehend. There's a gravestone there in the little family cemetery at Brook Cove, and on it they carved a line that has always struck me as the truest thing anybody managed to say about the whole affair. It says more or less not now, but in the coming years it will be in a better land. We'll read the meaning of our tears, and sometime we'll understand. That was the prayer they carved in stone. And the cruelty of it is that the sometime never came. We never did understand. Going on 100 years now, and we never have. Lord knows people tried. They looked for a reason the way you'd search a drowned man's pockets. Some said it was a head injury, that Charlie had taken a bad blow some time before, an accident, and that it had changed him, damaged something behind his eyes, and that the man who killed that family on Christmas wasn't rightly the same man his neighbors had known. Maybe. Some said it was the money, the fear of the depression, coming down a proud man who couldn't face going under, and decided to take them all out of a world he could no longer protect them in. Maybe that too. And decades later, long after, a writer who dug deep into it put forward a darker theory still, that there had been a terrible secret in that house, that the oldest girl had been wronged by her own father and was carrying a child by him, and that he did it all to bury the shame. I'll say only this about that. It's a theory raised many years after every soul who knew the truth was in the ground. And it has never been proven, and I won't stand here and hang it on a dead man as fact. I bring it up only because it shows you how desperate people have always been to find a why, desperate enough to reach for the very worst thing imaginable, because even a monstrous reason felt better than no reason at all. But that's just it. There is no reason we can hold. He left no note that explained it. He took the why into the woods and put it in the ground with himself, and it has stayed there. A good man, a respected man, a church-going family man, destroyed his entire family on the holiest, warmest day of the year, and arranged their bodies with loving care, and gave no account of himself to God or anybody. That's the case. The mystery isn't who. We know who. The mystery is the one that can never be solved. which is what could possibly move a human heart to such a thing. And that mystery is sealed forever. So how does a community live with something it cannot understand? I'll tell you what this one did. And you can judge it, though. I'd ask you to judge it gently, because I'm not sure after a lifetime that it put it on display. Within days of that funeral, the house was opened up to the public. Charlie's own brother, with the family's blessing, threw the doors of that farmhouse open and let the curious come and walk through it. And come they did. They came by the thousands in wagons and in those early automobiles until the roads through Brook Cove were backed up solid with people waiting their turn to file through the rooms where it had happened. And inside they left things just as they were. The Christmas tree still up. And on the kitchen table, the Christmas cake, the cake the oldest girl had baked that very morning, before her father came for her. They left it sitting right there. And so many people tried to pinch off a crumb of it to carry home as a souvenir, a piece of a murdered girl's last Christmas cake to keep, that they finally had to put a glass case over it to protect it from the souvenir hunters. A cake under glass on the table in the house where she died, with a line of strangers shuffling past to look at it. They sold photographs. They charged admission. The money, they said, went to Arthur, the boy who'd lived, which means that the one survivor of this family. The boy who buried his mother and his 6 brothers and sisters was kept fed in part by the dimes of strangers, paying to gawk at the place where his family was slaughtered. There's a knot in that I've never been able to untie, and it didn't stop with the house. Somebody wrote a song. Within months, there was a murder ballad, The Murder of the Lawson Family, and it was recorded and it spread out across the whole country, sung in parlors and on porches by people who'd never set foot in Stokes County and never would. The Lawsons became a tune you could pick on a banjo. The house stood as an attraction for years and years, decades. Long enough that when I was a boy, well into my own childhood, it was still a place. People went, still a thing you did. And my own kin took me there. And I held my dime. And I walked through those rooms. And I stood and looked at that cake. I have been uneasy about that my whole life. I want to tell you, I felt the wrongness of it, even as a child. But I didn't, not really. To me, it was just a strange and famous and slightly thrilling place. The murder house. The thing the grown-ups whispered about. And I was curious the way children are curious. The unease came later when I was old enough to understand that the cake under that glass had been baked by a 17-year-old girl with her own hands for a Christmas she didn't live to eat. And that I had stood there and looked at it like it was a thing in a museum. Like she was a thing in a museum. And so here is where I've come to rest after carrying this all these years on the hard question of what we did. The easy thing is to call it ghoulish and leave it there. Greedy, morbid, shameful, the brother charging admission, the crowds, the cake under glass, a whole county feeding off its own grief, like buzzards. And there's truth in that. I won't pretend there isn't. There was money in it, and there was a low appetite in it, the same appetite that slows every car down past a wreck on the highway. But I've come to think it was something else too underneath, or alongside. Because I've had a long time to wonder why people really came. Why they waited in those backed up roads in the cold. Why they wanted so badly to walk through those rooms. Why a grown man would carry home a crumb of a dead girl's cake. I think it's because you cannot bury a why. You can bury a body. They buried 9 of them in the cold 3 days after Christmas, and they had a grave to stand at. But there was no grave for the question. There was no funeral for the reason. And the reason was the thing nobody could live with. That this could happen here to a good family at the hand of a good man for no cause anyone could name. That kind of thing with no handle on it, no explanation to grip it, floats loose in a community, and it terrifies people in a way that even the deaths don't. Because if there's no reason, then it could be anyone. It could be the man down the road. It could be your own father. It could, God forbid, be you. And so I think the line, the cake under glass, the song, I think it was a clumsy, mercenary, a deeply human attempt to do the one thing that couldn't be done, to get a handle on it, to turn a thing that had no shape into a thing you could walk through, room by room, with a beginning and a middle and an end, even if the end was just a cake, to make it a story you could stand inside of for a dime and then walk back out of into the daylight alive. People couldn't understand it, so they did the next nearest thing. They went and looked at it over and over the way your tongue goes back to a sore tooth, trying to make the senseless feel a little less senseless by sheer familiarity. It didn't work. It never could. But I understand the reaching now in a way I couldn't as a boy with my dime. I'm an old man now, older than Charlie Lawson ever got to be. The house is long gone. The crowds quit coming the way crowds do, and the building came down at last. And there's no murder house to tour anymore, just a place in the country where one used to be. Arthur, the boy who lived, he didn't get much of a life out of his terrible luck. He grew up and he married, and just 16 years after he walked home from town with that box of shells, he was killed in a car wreck in 1945. The one who survived the slaughter died young anyway on a road. And there's a grim arithmetic in that I've never liked to dwell on. What's left is the grave at Brook Cove, with its promise that sometime we'll understand a promise that's gone unkept for a century. What's left is the ballad still sung here and there by people who don't know it was real. And what's left, the thing I keep coming back to, is the photograph. Because of all the looking this county did, all the gawking and the dimes and the cake under glass, there was only one kind of looking that was ever worth a thing. And it's the looking he gave us himself without meaning to. He had their picture made first. He dressed them up and sat them down and had them preserved 2 weeks before he destroyed them for reasons known only to whatever was moving in him. And so we have them. Not the rooms where they died, not the cake she didn't eat. We have them all 9 in their new clothes, looking back at the camera alive. The mother, the big boy who'd live and the big girl who wouldn't. The 2 middle girls. The 2 little boys who'd hide. The baby in her mother's arms. The murder house only ever showed us where they ended. The photograph shows us that they were. And maybe that's the only looking that was ever any good. Not at the place it happened, but at the faces the way they were before. So that what we remember isn't a crime scene with a cake in it, but a family. So I'll do the last thing left to do. I'll say their names and let the photograph, and not the murder house, be how we keep them. Fanny, Marie, Carrie, May Bell, James, Raymond, and the baby Mary Lou. Sometime the stone says we'll understand. We haven't yet. But we can still look at the picture he left us and see them whole, and that will have to be enough. Because it's all we were ever going to get.